Jealousy is one of those emotions people love to talk about when it's obvious, but they rarely want to discuss it when it's sitting quietly inside the people closest to them. That's because jealousy doesn't always walk into your life announcing itself. Sometimes it comes smiling, sometimes it comes disguised as concern, sometimes it sounds like advice, sometimes it sounds like friendship, family loyalty, church fellowship, or even love. That's what makes jealousy so dangerous. The person who envies you doesn't always want you to know what's happening inside their heart. The hardest kind of jealousy to recognize is the kind that comes from somebody you never expected to compete with you. You may assume that your family wants you to win because you're family. You may assume your closest friend wants to see you succeed because you've been through so much together. You may believe that the people sitting beside you in church are automatically happy when blessings come into your life. You may think the people in your neighborhood will celebrate when one of their own finally gets ahead. But life teaches a painful lesson. Everybody who knows you doesn't necessarily know how to celebrate you. That's especially important in communities where people have struggled together for generations. The Black community has experienced racism, economic hardship, discrimination, broken opportunities, and social pressure that have affected families and neighborhoods deeply. Yet sometimes the very people who understand the pain of being held back can turn around and hold each other back. Instead of seeing another person's progress as proof that progress is possible, jealousy can convince somebody to see that progress as a personal insult. That's when somebody else's new house becomes a problem. Their new relationship becomes a problem. Their business becomes a problem. Their education becomes a problem. Their confidence becomes a problem. Their appearance becomes a problem. Their peace of mind becomes a problem. Their decision to leave an unhealthy environment becomes a problem. Who do you think you are leaving here? Suddenly, the person who used to be one of us starts being treated like they think they're better than everybody else. Sometimes nobody ever asks whether that person actually thinks they're better. The assumption gets made because somebody else is uncomfortable watching them grow. That's where we need to have an honest conversation about jealousy. Because jealousy isn't just about wanting what somebody else has. Sometimes jealousy is about resenting who somebody is becoming. Sometimes it's about watching someone break patterns that you'd never found the courage to break yourself. Sometimes their freedom reminds you of your own captivity. Their discipline reminds you of your own excuses. Their happiness reminds you of your own unhappiness. Their courage reminds you of the opportunities you allowed fear to steal. And instead of confronting those feelings, some people attack the person who triggered them. There's something revealing about the way people respond when your life begins to change. When you're struggling, everybody can feel comfortable around you. When you're broke, confused, heartbroken, unemployed, or trying to find your direction, some people will gladly sit beside you. They may even encourage you. But when you start becoming healthier, stronger, more successful, more confident, or more independent, the atmosphere can suddenly change. That's when you may notice fewer phone calls. Invitations may disappear. Conversations may become strange. Compliments may contain an insult. Somebody may congratulate you while immediately explaining why your accomplishment isn't that impressive. Somebody may hear about your success and change the subject. Somebody may suddenly become extremely interested in everything that could go wrong in your life. That's not always jealousy, but when those behaviors form a repeated pattern, you should pay very close attention. Jealousy often has a problem with celebration. A jealous person may tolerate your struggle because your struggle doesn't threaten their position in their own mind. But your progress can create a comparison they never asked for. You didn't necessarily create the comparison. They created it themselves. You simply became the measuring stick. That's why you have to stop assuming that every negative reaction is about something you did wrong. Sometimes your growth exposes something inside another person that they don't want to face. You can walk into a room without saying a word and still make somebody uncomfortable simply because your presence reminds them of something they don't like about themselves. That doesn't mean you should become arrogant. It doesn't mean you should flaunt your blessings. It doesn't mean you should intentionally make people feel small. In fact, humility becomes even more important when you recognize that your progress can trigger people. You don't need to rub your success in anybody's face, but you also don't need to shrink yourself so somebody else can feel comfortable. One of the most painful forms of jealousy comes from family, because family is where most people expect unconditional love. You can forgive a stranger for being strange. You can walk away from a coworker. You can stop dealing with an acquaintance. But when jealousy comes from somebody who shares your blood, your history, your childhood, your family name, the situation can become complicated. Sometimes siblings compete without admitting they're competing. Cousins compare lifestyles. In-laws compare marriages. Relatives compare children. Somebody gets a better job, and suddenly there's an explanation for why the job isn't really that good. Somebody buys a home, and suddenly everybody has something negative to say about the neighborhood. Somebody gets married, and suddenly their spouse becomes the target. Somebody starts a business, and instead of asking how they did it, people start looking for reasons why it won't last. That's how jealousy hides behind criticism. Criticism can be healthy when it comes from genuine concern, but jealousy doesn't want to help you improve. Jealousy wants to reduce the value of what you've accomplished. It wants to make your victory smaller because your victory makes somebody else feel smaller. And sometimes the family member who does this may genuinely love you. That's an uncomfortable truth. People can love you and still struggle with jealousy. People can care about you and still compete with you. People can pray for you and still resent you. People can hug you while carrying feelings they haven't dealt with. That's why relationships can't be judged only by affection. You have to watch patterns. There's a conversation we need to have within the Black community without turning it into another opportunity to attack each other. We talk constantly about outside forces that have harmed Black people, and many of those conversations are necessary. But we also have to be honest about what happens inside our own communities. We can't demand unity while secretly resenting one another. We can't talk about supporting Black businesses while hoping the Black person who owns one fails. We can't talk about Black excellence while becoming irritated when someone actually demonstrates excellence. We can't talk about building strong families while allowing jealousy to create division between relatives. We can't talk about community while quietly destroying the people closest to us. That contradiction needs to be confronted. Sometimes the person trying to build something gets mocked. The person trying to improve their health gets accused of thinking they're better. The person trying to leave a toxic relationship gets told they're acting brand new. The person trying to become financially responsible gets called selfish. The person who establishes boundaries gets called difficult. The person who refuses to participate in gossip suddenly becomes arrogant. Why? Because growth changes relationships. And when you change, everybody who benefited from the old version of you may not celebrate the new version of you. That doesn't mean everybody around you is jealous, but it means you have to understand that your transformation can disturb relationships that were built around your limitations. The church deserves an honest conversation about jealousy too. Faith doesn't automatically eliminate human emotions. A person can know scripture and still struggle with insecurity. A person can pray loudly and still secretly compare themselves to you. A person can sing about blessings and still become uncomfortable when somebody else receives one. Sometimes jealousy even hides behind spiritual language. People can question your motives because they don't understand your confidence. They can call your success pride. They can criticize your appearance while pretending they're concerned about humility. They can question your blessing instead of celebrating it. They can turn your testimony into gossip because they're uncomfortable with the fact that your life changed. That's dangerous because spiritual communities should be places where people can celebrate one another without feeling threatened. There's enough pain outside the church without bringing unnecessary competition inside of it. There's enough division in society without creating more division among people who claim to love one another. The church should teach people how to recognize jealousy inside themselves, not just how to recognize it in everybody else. One of the most destructive things jealousy can do is create division between people. Instead of attacking you directly, a jealous person may try to influence how other people see you. They may tell one person one version of a story and another person something completely different. They may present themselves as the victim while quietly making you the villain. That's how alliances form around resentment. Suddenly, people who barely know what happened have opinions about you. Somebody who never had a problem with you suddenly has an attitude. Somebody who used to call you starts ignoring you. Somebody who once defended you becomes distant. You may eventually discover that conversations about you have been happening everywhere except with you. That's one of the reasons gossip is so destructive. Gossip allows people to build relationships around the shared dislike without ever giving the target an opportunity to defend themselves. And once a group bonds over negativity toward one person, the truth becomes less important. The group begins feeding itself. That's why you have to be careful about people who constantly bring you stories about how much other people supposedly dislike you. Sometimes they're warning you. Sometimes they're creating the very division they claim to be protecting you from. There's another side of jealousy that people don't talk about enough. Sometimes the person who supposedly can't stand you spends an unbelievable amount of time watching you. They know what you're doing. They know where you've been. They know who you're talking to. They notice your clothes. They notice your relationships. They notice your accomplishments. They notice your mistakes. They notice when you're absent. They notice when you're happy. Think about how strange that is. If somebody truly has no interest in you, why are they constantly studying your life? Jealousy can create a strange obsession where a person doesn't want to be close to you, but they also don't want to stop watching you. They don't want to support you, but they want to know what you're doing. They don't want to celebrate you, but they want to know when you fail. That's why you should never measure somebody's feelings towards you only by how often they talk about you. Sometimes the person talking about you the most is the person who wishes they can stop thinking about you. Another warning sign is how somebody responds when you establish a boundary. Healthy people can hear no without turning it into a personal war. They may not like your answer, but they can respect your right to make your own decision. Jealous people can struggle with that because your boundary reminds them that they don't control you. You say no, and suddenly your entire history becomes evidence against you. Something you did 5 years ago gets brought into the conversation. Something harmless gets reinterpreted. A simple decision becomes proof that you're selfish. Your boundary becomes an insult. That's when you have to recognize what's really happening. Some people don't want access to you because they love you. They want access because access gives them a sense of control. When you take that access away, they become very, very angry. One of the biggest mistakes you can make is changing yourself just to keep jealous people comfortable. You stop talking about your accomplishments. You hide your happiness. You stop dressing the way you like. You stop sharing your goals. You stop pursuing opportunities. You become afraid to tell people good news because you already know somebody is going to find something negative to say. That's not peace. That's emotional captivity. You shouldn't have to become smaller because somebody else refuses to grow. You shouldn't have to apologize for your blessings. You shouldn't have to feel guilty because your life improved. You shouldn't have to sabotage your own progress to protect somebody else's ego. Humility doesn't mean humiliation. Being humble doesn't mean pretending you have nothing when you've worked hard to build something. You can be grateful without being ashamed. You can celebrate yourself without believing you're better than everybody else. There's a difference between arrogance and confidence, and jealous people sometimes deliberately confuse the two because your confidence makes them feel uncomfortable. But here's where the conversation has to turn inward. If we're going to talk about jealousy honestly, we can't only point fingers at jealous people. We also have to ask ourselves whether we've been jealous. Have you ever secretly hoped somebody would fail? Have you ever been irritated because somebody received an opportunity you wanted? Have you ever criticized somebody's success because you couldn't understand how they achieved it? Have you ever been happy when somebody you disliked experienced a setback? Have you ever compared your life to somebody else's and allowed that comparison to change how you treated them? Those questions are not comfortable, but growth rarely begins with comfort. Sometimes the jealous person is you. And admitting that doesn't make you evil. It makes you human. The important thing is what you do after you recognize it. You can choose to heal. You can choose to stop comparing. You can choose to celebrate people. You can choose to build your own life instead of constantly studying somebody else's. You can choose to turn somebody else's success into inspiration instead of evidence that you're losing. That's where jealousy loses its power. You need to understand something about your life. Everybody doesn't deserve a seat at your table. That doesn't mean you should become cold. It doesn't mean you should hate people. It doesn't mean you should walk around assuming everybody is against you. It means you need discernment. Love people, but pay attention. Forgive people, but learn from patterns. Be generous, but maintain boundaries. Celebrate others, but don't neglect yourself. And most importantly, stop confusing familiarity with loyalty. Somebody could have known you for 20 years and still not know how to love the person you've become. Sometimes, you just have to accept that. You don't have to expose everybody. You don't have to confront everybody. You don't have to announce every boundary. Sometimes the greatest response to jealousy is simply observation. Let people reveal themselves. When you succeed, watch. When you receive good news, watch. When you establish a boundary, watch. When somebody else praises you, watch. When you enter a new chapter, watch. People will tell you who they are through patterns long before they tell you with words. And when somebody repeatedly shows you that your happiness makes them uncomfortable, stop trying to convince them to celebrate you. You can't force somebody to have a heart they haven't chosen to develop. There comes a point where you have to stop asking everybody around you for permission to become who you were meant to become. Your life is not a group project. Your healing is not a committee decision. Your future doesn't require unanimous approval. You can love your family and still establish boundaries. You can love your community and still move differently. You can love your church and still refuse to participate in unhealthy behavior. You can love your friends and still recognize when a friendship has become competitive. You can love people without giving them unlimited access to you. That's maturity. Jealousy only wins when it convinces you to become bitter too. That's the trap. Somebody mistreats you because they're jealous, and now you become jealous of them. Somebody attacks your success, and now you spend your life trying to prove them wrong. Somebody gossips about you, and now you spend all your energy gossiping about them. Now both people are trapped. Don't take somebody else's sickness and make it your identity. If somebody can't celebrate you, keep moving. If somebody misunderstands you, keep moving. If somebody needs to diminish you so they can feel better about themselves, keep moving. You don't need revenge, you need direction. The Black community doesn't need more competition disguised as culture. We need more people who can genuinely celebrate another person's progress. Imagine what would happen if somebody opened a business and the community immediately asked how they could support it instead of asking how much money they are making. Imagine if somebody bought a home and the first response was congratulations instead of criticism. Imagine if somebody got married and people prayed for the marriage instead of waiting for it to fail. Imagine if somebody became successful and the community saw that success as evidence that more success was possible. Imagine if somebody broke a generational pattern and instead of calling them different, we called them courageous. That's the kind of community worth building. At the end of the day, jealousy is somebody else's internal battle. You can't control what somebody thinks. You can't control what somebody compares. You can't control whether somebody celebrates you. You can only control how you respond. Don't spend your life looking over your shoulder. Don't become obsessed with who doesn't like you. Don't allow somebody else's insecurity to make you insecure. Don't allow somebody else's bitterness to make you bitter. And don't allow somebody else's jealousy to convince you that your blessings are something you should apologize for. There's nothing wrong with being happy. There's nothing wrong with growing. There's nothing wrong with becoming better. There's nothing wrong with finally becoming the person you spent years trying to become. So if you recognize jealousy around you, don't panic. Don't immediately accuse everybody. Don't turn every strange look into evidence. Watch the pattern. Look at the behavior. Give people room to prove who they are. But once somebody repeatedly demonstrates that they cannot handle your happiness, your growth, your boundaries, or your success, believe the pattern instead of making excuses for it. And if you discover that jealousy is living inside of you, don't run from that truth either. You don't have to pretend you're above human emotions. You have to become honest enough to confront them. Somebody else's blessing doesn't mean your blessing has been canceled. Somebody else's beauty doesn't make you ugly. Somebody else's relationship doesn't mean you'll never find love. Somebody else's success doesn't mean there's no room for yours. The Black community has to learn to celebrate without comparison. We have to learn how to correct without destroying. We have to learn how to disagree without becoming enemies. We have to learn to see another Black person rise and understand that their rise doesn't automatically mean our fall. There's room at the table when we stop fighting over who gets the biggest chair. And personally, you have to protect your peace without becoming paranoid. Everybody isn't jealous of you. Everybody isn't against you. Everybody doesn't want what you have, but everybody doesn't deserve unlimited access to you either. Wisdom is knowing the difference. Wisdom is being able to love people while still recognizing when a relationship has become unhealthy. So keep growing, keep building, keep healing, Keep becoming. Don't dim your light because somebody else refuses to deal with their darkness. Don't make yourself miserable just to make somebody else comfortable. Walk with humility, but walk with confidence. Celebrate others genuinely. And when your moment comes, receive it without guilt. Because your responsibility isn't to become smaller so jealous people can feel bigger. Your responsibility is to become the healthiest, strongest, wisest version of yourself that you can possibly become. Much love to you all. Leave your comments below. On to the next one. LanceScurv out. Peace.